All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice long Memorial Day weekend, hopefully. My name is Aiden Allman Cooper. I am one of the trustees for the New Jersey Association for Gifted Children. And on behalf of the organization, we'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar. Tonight, we have a very special guest joining us to speak about some very important topics surrounding gifted and twice exceptional children. And we hope that that conversation is relevant to you especially. Dr. Matthew Zakreski is a prominent child psychologist and has extensive experience in the world of gifted education. He has experience particularly in identifying and using assessment tools to identify gifted and talented students as well. And before we turn it over to Dr. Zakreski for his presentation, I just want to go over a couple of things, if you don't mind. Tonight, we're going to do things a little bit differently. If you guys have any questions on some of the topics that Dr. Zakreski is presenting during the slides, please feel free to reach out and I'll try to get to a few questions during that. I know you guys have a lot of questions, but for tonight, what we're going to do is, unfortunately, since you guys, based on how this is technologically set up, you guys will just have to type your answers in. There is also a way, if you prefer not to have your name associated with the question, there is a way on Zoom to make your question anonymous. So please, if you like to, please feel free to take advantage of that. And before we get into tonight's program, I'd like to turn things over to our president, Connie Drake O'Brien, if you'd like Connie to share a few words.
Sure. Thank you, Aiden. And hello, Dr. Matt. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Should I point out to the chief? Like, I don't know, how does it work now?
Stop.
That's what I should do, really.
No. All right. Besides those two, my name is Connie Drake O'Brien, and I am here tonight excited to be with Dr. Matt as usual. I absolutely enjoy hearing everything he has to say because every time I am in the room or within listening distance of him, I learn something new. But I just wanted to take a moment and let you all know that NJAGC is thrilled to bring you this webinar tonight, but most importantly, we are here for you and we are available after the webinar. So if you have any questions for any of us, please reach out. I will put my email address in the chat, and we welcome emails and would love to discuss any questions you have about your students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt. And I will
thank you, Madam
down
President.
to you.
And we'll be monitoring the chat for any questions, okay? All right, Dr. Matt, it's all yours.
Thank you, Aiden. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for being here with us. Thank you for giving up your Tuesday evening, or if you're watching this later, thank you for giving up that time. So I'm Dr. Matt, and Aiden, you will learn this about me. Dr. Zakreski is my dad, so everybody calls me Dr. Matt. I will invite you to do the same. So today we're going to talk a lot about assessment practices. Now, this is some of the nitty gritty of this. And you know, if you've been to one of my talks before, you know, a lot of times I'm much more into process and like what things look like on the ground and how, you know, like the soft skills. This is much more concrete stuff, but you'll find as we go, there's still some wiggle room, and that's why being informed as a parent, as an educator, as a mental health professional is vital to navigating this field. So what is gifted anyway, right? We got to start with a shared term. So traditionally it's an IQ at or above 130, you know, and that is a pretty standard definition. And sometimes you run into schools or districts that want to do things a little bit differently. And to them, I say, you don't know more than we do. So we are the gifted professionals. Please listen to us. If you don't have an IQ test, you can qualify for gifted by scoring at the 90th percentile or higher in standardized testing. That can be state testing. I worked with a family from a pretty low income section of Pennsylvania. They couldn't afford private testing. We were going through the numbers. We realized that this kid had scored in the 99th percentile or higher on 3 years in a row of state testing. And we were able to use that to get him into the gifted program. 90th percentile or higher in the subjective assessment of non-academic skills, if we're going to use Susan Johnson's definition of giftedness, which includes non-scholastic items like leadership and social skills and creativity and the arts, some sort of measure of that, the Gates gifted and talented evaluation scales are a common measure there. 90th percentile or higher gives us that as well. Or if a kid is working at least 2 grade levels above age peers and age normed activities. We're going to unpack a little bit more about what that means later, but if you're 2 grade levels above, by definition, you're in the gifted program. And then it's really important to understand that any gifted level score makes somebody gifted. And you're going to see schools and districts who still have, still push back on this. And they're like, well, we're looking for that full scale IQ score of 130. And I'm like, sure, right? But if a kid has a gifted score in X, then we can give that kid's gifted services in that thing. They don't have to necessarily be the full gifted program, but we want to give everybody what they need. There is still this common misconception, right? That gifted kids are gifted in everything. And and that's not true. And to Cecilia, to your question, any of these things, not a combination. Some districts are going to use this like a matrix, like, okay, you got to have the IQ score, the 90th percentile score, and the subjective and the grade levels. And that is really not best practice. Any one of these gives you a seat at the table, and this is the idea that we used to treat 130 as an IQ score like a hard pass, like do not pass go, do not collect $200. In the old days, like if you didn't have the $14 to cross the George Washington Bridge, they would make you turn around. We don't do that anymore. It's our understanding of it is a lot more nuanced, a lot more flexible, and it needs to reflect that. To that point, giftedness is not determined through IQ testing alone. Now, if you have reason to believe your kiddo is gifted, a formal assessment is the best way forward. It's the best, cleanest process. However, it's not the be all end all. We have to also measure other characteristics that would indicate giftedness, right? So we have kids who are strong writers or strong coders, brilliant athletes, powerful dancers. It's really something that there is a subjective nature to this, right? We've got to be able to cast the wider net. And Scott Peters, who's, a friend and a colleague and really is the head honcho when it comes to this kind of work, he says we need to cast the widest possible net to catch the most number of kids, to give most kids the chances to get into the program, right? So we want to test forgiveness in a way that provides verification of the abilities and, if possible, offers objective evidence for school officials to demonstrate the kids have educational needs. Let's see. So Bernice says, what do you think about the InView test? I don't hate it. My bias is towards other ones, which we'll unpack in a little bit. But the psychometrics I've seen on it aren't terrible. So, it's not a bad one. It's certainly one I've heard of before. And Roya says, in New Jersey, can they decline testing the child if they don't feel like gifted if under the age 3? No, is the short answer. It's no with a but, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So Roya, make sure that we you feel like I've gotten to answer that question. So IQ, what we call IQ is really an acronym for intelligence quotient. So it's your age norm score over 100. So one way to think about IQ is what percentage over average you might be. So if you have an IQ of 105, you are 5% smarter than we would expect you to be for your age. That's a good way to think about IQ, but we never report IQ that way. We just say the number, right? So if you're an IQ 127, that's just how smart you are. But no number in psychometrics, or really in any number, makes sense out of context, right? Without an age norm score, I could say Aiden has an IQ of 903, right? Well, what is that out of? Is that out of 900? Is that out of 1,000? Is that out of 10,000? Right? We need to know where it means. And normed tests like IQ tests give us the comparative sample that gives that number power. Standard deviations on this are 15 points. So giftedness traditionally starts at 130, an IQ that is 2 standard deviations above the mean. And our friends at the Davidson Academy out in Reno, I'll be out there in about a month. They because they work with exceptionally gifted kids, their cutoff starts at 145. Now, remember how I said before, we used to treat these numbers like really hard and fast, right? So my IQ was 144. So I didn't get to be a Davidson kid because I missed it by 1 point. And I was laughing about that with Roxanne the other day. And she was like, you could nowadays we'd take you in. I'm like, well, that doesn't help me now. I'm 40. Go back and apologize to 13-year-old me. But I digress. So here are the terms, and you'll see in the let's see what tests. So yeah, we're going to talk about what tests the school should use in a little bit. And if our good friend the GII, yes, we're going to talk about that too. So these are some of the numbers that give us a little bit of context for the various levels of gifted. Now, I don't hear a lot of people use the term mildly gifted, right? I think it sort of sounds to me like a little bit pregnant. But it does show you that there are these kids who we traditionally call, if we go back a slide, kids in this 14% here, what we call high achievers. Kids who are really bright, but not quite at that level of neurodivergence, right? They're bright kids. They can work really hard. They're very accomplished. My mentor in grad school, Dr. Jackie Zaraba, always used to say she thought the best IQ you could have was 121, because she's like, you're smart, you can get all stuff, but you don't have all the baggage that comes with being gifted. I'm like, the more I get into the field, the more I'm like, she was definitely right. So moderately gifted, or just what we would call just gifted, IQ from 130 to 135. I'm sorry, 130 to 144. 1 or 2 per classroom, usually qualified gifted programs. We'll talk about why they wouldn't in a moment. Highly gifted, it's that next standard deviation up. This is where you get into Davidson, Camp Epsilon, those programs. These, oftentimes the kids who are doing a lot of things intuitively, independently, exceptionally gifted. We're getting way out, right? We're out here in the tail end. I mean, these kids are unicorns, right? And I've done over 300 evaluations in my life, most of which are of gifted and neurodivergent kids. And, so I have more of these than a lot of my colleagues would, just because of the populations I serve. But even I have only gotten a handful of kids in the IQs in the 160s, 170s, and even in one case, one kid I've tested, IQ of 182. That was a fun day. I was like, man, we are finishing this. This is pretty spectacular. This is a kid that we managed. We got the school to move this kid from kindergarten to 4th grade, a radical grade skip, a radical acceleration. And last time I checked in with the family, this grade skip was working exceptionally well for this kid. So here are intelligence tests. Now, there's a lot out there. Each of these have strengths and weaknesses. We would be here for the whole rest of the hour if we went through all of them. I'm going to focus on the Wechsler measures. These are the most commonly used in schools. Working with a lot of school psychologists and people who do testing, the vast majority of us use the Wechsler. You do still see a lot of Stanford Benets out there. That's definitely the second one out there. But you'll probably see some ones that you're familiar with. The Kogat is definitely out there a lot. The Kaufman still pops up from time to time. But yeah, I'm going to focus on the Wechsler. So the Wechsler for children is the WISC, Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. It's for kids age 6 to 16. And the WAIS, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, and that's for people 16 and up. Now, so if I'm going to test a kid, I want to use the test that's going to give me the most predictive value. So if I there is a test for preschoolers. It's called the WIPSI. And oftentimes, in fact, some of you in this audience have probably heard me say this spiel. I said, but if you can wait, I think waiting for the WISC gives us better data, because then we're comparing you to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds rather than the preschool cohort, which is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I think it's better data the longer you can, you can predict outward. And when I retest my high school kids, I almost always wait till they're 16. So once again, I can compare them to the higher measure. So here's some things that we want to keep in our minds as we engage in this testing. A lot of things on the WISC and WAIS are timed. And as you know about your kids, so Uma, the Johns Hopkins SCAT test, love it, really good measure. It's not quite proprietary, but they're sort of the only people who use it. If you have more questions about that, because it's a little bit more nuanced, just shoot me an email. My contact information will be at the end. Great question, though. So yeah, a lot of things on the WISC and WAIS are timed. And if you work with your kids, your kids may often do struggle with time limits. So it's completely appropriate to ask the examiner to consider timing when scoring a test. So if I give a kid, if the test says a kid has 45 seconds to answer a question and they answer it correctly in 49 seconds, I have to mark that question wrong because it was submitted after the time limit. However, the content of that answer was accurate. And I care a lot more about the content because the single easiest accommodation to give a kid in school is extra time. So I'm going to mark that. I'm going to note it in my records, and I'm going to give 2 scores. Score with time limits applied, score without time limits applied. That is completely appropriate to do. Now we have my wonderful friend, the expanded norms. That's right, I brought a visual aid, friends. So for the WISC in particular, it's only meant to measure up to a certain level. And then the kids run out of questions because there's this thing on the Wechsler measures called discontinue criteria. So basically you keep asking them questions until they get a certain number wrong in a row. But if a kid never gets that number wrong in a row, we technically speaking have to keep asking them questions until they get a couple wrong in a row. Most practitioners stop when they run out of questions, and that's fine, right? We'll talk about how to report that in a moment. But it's one of those things, like if you're shopping for someone to do an IQ test on your kid, ask them, do you use the extended norms? Do you have them? Why not? But it's we want to know how high our kids can fly. Also with our kids, it's vital to establish a lot of rapport. And when we establish a lot of rapport, we're really helping kids understand like what we're doing, why we're here, all that good stuff. With neurotypical kids, it's a little bit more easy. This is just like another thing to do. Go do it. I spend a lot of time setting expectations, being playful. Like you really want to make sure that the kid feels comfortable with the examiner, even if you're going to jump on a Zoom call or do a meet and greet before you actually do the testing. Spending a little extra time goes a long way to seeing the best version of that kid on test day. Because, and this is going to segue into our next point, this is a demand task, right? I'm going to ask the kids to work very hard at this. So when I ask kids to work really hard, I mean, I'm putting them in demand situations. They got to trust me. They got to understand that I'm on their side. So setting expectations, building rapport, having context goes a long way. I always tell kids, I want to see how your brain works. That's my job. I am a brain nerd. I want to see how your brain works so I can tell school how to teach you better. This isn't, are you gifted or not? It's not a binary. It's not a duality. That lowers the anxiety threshold for kids and makes things a little easier to manage. The more we know about how their brain works, the more we can set them up for success. We want to give kids a lot of breaks and a lot of snacks. General rule of thumb, send them with some snacks, send them with a drink. I do my testing at my dining room table, so it has the benefit of having a clearly accessible bathroom and a pantry full of snacks, but not everybody does that. And then We also talk about FSIQ, the full scale IQ, and the GAI, the General Abilities Index. Now, without getting too deep into the nuance of this, because I easily could, the idea here is that the FSIQ is made up of 5 indices. We're going to go through those in the next slide. And that's verbal reasoning, visual spatial processing, fluid reasoning, memory, and processing speed. Now, we know that gifted kids tend to struggle with memory and processing speed. So the GAI calculates IQ without as much impact of processing speed or memory. It limits the impact of those statistically. So I often report both scores when I'm doing a test on a gifted kid, because it's like, okay, with normal memory constraints and more normal time limits, this kid is this smart. If we take those things out of the picture, because they are inherently arbitrary, this is how smart this kid is. I tested a kid recently whose full scale IQ popped out at 119, which is a perfectly fine score, high average, really smart, great kid. But with the GAI, when we took the time limit factor out of that, their IQ popped up to the 142. That's in the very superior range, almost highly gifted. So it's a huge statistical jump just by limiting those factors. So you always want to know what the GAI score is, and that's how you're an informed consumer as a parent. Lastly, start points. The start points are age normed for kids. So, 6 to 9-year-olds is going to start one place, 10 to 12-year-olds is going to start one place, 13 to 16-year-olds are going to start somewhere else. Setting expectations is a really important thing, because kids are going to want to know, how many questions do I have to do? How long does this take? And if we tell them, hey, you keep answering questions until you get a certain number wrong, lets them know that they can jump as high as they want. Let's see how high you can go. These are all ways to be a more conformed consumer as a parent, but also make sure that you are asking the right questions of the tester and of your child. So yeah, so Roya says her kid's IQ was 136, GI was 147. That's a huge split, right? That's the difference between a gifted program and the Davidson Institute, right? That's a big difference. So thank you for sharing that. So hyperactive ADHD when taking the test. Oh yes, we're going to talk about how to control for that in a little bit. I see it a lot. It's a vital piece when we're considering this population. And then Anna says that our district uses the Naglieri. Love the Naglieri. So, and then how do we use the WISC scores for IEP students in a comparable way if their disability negates taking one of our gifted assessments? Wow, that is a nuanced question. So it really would depend on what the scores looked like. There are like for like comparisons from the Naglieri to the WISC. You'd really have to break it down by score. Maybe shoot me an email afterwards, Anna, and we can talk in more detail. Okay, so let's see. Yes, I do have experience testing children from other countries as well. We're going to talk about that more too. You guys are really engaged. I love this. Okay, here's our first index, the verbal comprehension index. The two you have to do are similarities and vocabulary. Similarities, we're going to ask what one thing and another thing have in common. So if I said, red and blue, what do they have in common? How are they alike? The answer is colors, right? You may have to prompt them for extra words. Now, it's interesting because it starts very concrete, right? How is a truck and a boat alike? Well, they're both vehicles, right? How is a brother and a sister alike? Well, they're both siblings, right? Most kids think concretely. When they get more abstract, how are time and space alike? That's when it gets complicated. And that's where you see kids, when it moves from that concrete to the abstract, a lot of kids fall off. Vocabulary, statistically speaking, one of the most stable predictors of intelligence. It's one of the most consistent scores over time. It also is worth noticing that it tends to skew towards gifted kids in the ELA fields. I was an ELA gifted kid, right? My strengths were in the humanities, reading, writing, history, art. That's what I'm good at. So my scores were always a little inflated in that way rather than the maths and sciences. And it's just a thing we need to consider, because if it's skewing towards ELA kids, we need to think about how it looks for STEM kids. And we also need to talk about how vocabulary may be related to higher socioeconomic status. These are families with more books in the home, families who tend to have more access to more things. Thus, there's more words in the home, more words spoken. So there are some analyses that suggest that vocabulary needs to be considered within the context of what the home is bringing to the table. Now, it doesn't mean it's a bad score or a bad number. We just, intersectionality is the best practice when we're talking about testing any kid. And then information is considered an additional test. It's just answering questions about what you might have learned. If I have time, I love doing this with my kids just because it gives them an opportunity to flex that trivial knowledge. Why, yes, I do know the boiling point of water in Celsius. Thank you for asking. Visual spatial, block design, wonderful, wonderful measure. We love block design. Okay, lots of questions coming in here. So we will talk about the difference between the COGAT and the Wechsler in a little bit. I would be very interested to know why the school won't accept the Wechsler, though I have a feeling I know why. Speaking two other languages certainly can impact the score. Multilingual households, kids tend to master English later in life. That can certainly impact the verbal score. And this is a highly verbal test. Even though not everything involves verbal answers, you have to be able to hear the questions, articulate your answers. So it's a verbal skew, and we have to factor that in, especially if English is not the first language or if it's a multilinguistic household. Bernice asks, what are the identifying processes and tests for school districts should be using? We will get to that at the end. Great question. I would also defer that to the working group at New Jersey Gifted Association. They're the ones who are going to be able to answer that from a state level. I certainly have my opinions. And then do schools have to accept testing from a medical professional? No, is the short answer. We like them to, and we want them to. But the fact of the matter is that unless a person is a certified school psychologist, the district is not obligated to accept the results of a test. Now, most do, right? I have done over 300 of these. I've only had 2 rejected. And in both cases, the district in question was not playing fair from the jump, right? We knew what we were walking into. And that's when you end up in due process and you end up doing the the whole court dance. And so they don't have to accept them, though they often do, right? And that's where talking to the psychologist that you pick, do you work with this district? Do you know someone who does? Can you talk to the school psychologist, establish those relationships? I find the vast majority of my colleagues, whether they are other clinical psychologists or neuropsychologists or school psychologists, we're all sort of on the same team. We all want to help each other out. The fact of the matter is, in this day and age, the school psychologists have way too much work as it is. They're well behind. So when you can go find somebody private like me, it takes some work off their plate. And the vast majority of time, they are willing to at least hear us out, if not accept the report as is. Block design, we have to move the blocks to make some shapes. Now, we want to pay attention here if gifted kids have fine motor delays. So paying attention to how they're moving the blocks. There's a guide for them to use. Watching how they use it is really important. Once again, there's this timer on this one. It's the very first test too. So we see the most anxiety here. We see the most settling behavior. And kids can be very perfectionistic, which if it's a timed test and they're still fiddling with it and I can't stop the timer until they take their hands off of it, every so often you'll have a kid who, if they have 45 seconds to do it, takes 46 seconds because they're still fiddling with the thing. And technically speaking, you have to count that wrong. Now, I wouldn't, right? Because they clearly had the answer. They were just nudging it. It's not exactly 90 degrees. It's 90.3 degrees, but we have to factor that in. And then visual puzzle. These are very complex directions. This is something that kids often struggle with. They may make the same mistake over and over. They may argue. You know, a good professional is going to pay attention to that stuff, you know, pointing us in some directions versus others. Fluid reasoning, you know, trying to figure out what the pattern is. Once again, it gets much more abstract. Matrix reasoning is unique in this process because it's one where you have an answer bank, which some other ones do, but it's not timed. So this is one where I can say to kids, you might as well take a guess, right? You got a 1 in 5 shot of getting it right. You might as well guess rather than saying, I don't know. On the other ones, you're either going to run out of time, so you're going to lose it anyway. But this matrix reasoning is unique. So I always encourage a guess on this one. But then that gets into the idea of the perfectionism, of course. And then figure weights. Figure weights are all about algebraic relationships. Now, this is one where it's so fascinating. I think this is arguably the best predictor of gifted behavior later in life. Because even if you haven't had algebra, if you can figure out those relationships, one blue square seems to be equal to 3 red dots. So if on the other one I have 9 red dots, how many blue squares would that be? That's abstract relationship building. That's really, it's gifted level abstraction. And that's what we want to see from our kids. So I always pay a lot of attention to figure weights. Working memory, you give the kids numbers to remember. Inevitably, I have the worst memory. I know, just do your best. There's 3 versions of the test, so we pay attention to how they do across them. Picture span, they have to see some pictures and report back. Sometimes you get really interesting splits on this. Kids will do great with just repeating numbers who won't do great with pictures, or vice versa. Generally speaking, I find the kids with ADHD do better with just the raw numbers than you do the pictures, because the pictures are visually distracting. But of course, that's a broad statement. And then arithmetic is an elective subtest, just doing mental math. And it's interesting because you wouldn't think necessarily math is about memory. But if I say Jim has 3 bikes, Tony has 4 bikes, and Sally has 7 bikes, how many bikes do they have altogether? You have to remember every single piece of that information to solve the puzzle. And last but not least, our good friend processing speed. Processing speed has these 2 parts: coding. So you have to match a shape to a number, and then in a grid of just numbers with no shapes, do as many of them as you can. So this is one that the kids should be able to go faster as they go, because, you know, if 1 is an asterisk, then every time you see 1, you can do an asterisk. You learn it, and so you can speed up. But then that encourages kids to skip around, and the directions tell them explicitly not to. You got to pay attention to that. Then symbol search, you know, everyone has a target item and some distractor items. You got to look for which item is there and indicate if it's there, or indicate that it's not there by crossing no. When kids make mistakes in symbol search, it's really interesting to see what kind of mistakes they're making. Are they making mistakes of commission? Are they indicating the item is there when it's not there? Or are they making mistakes of omission? They're missing the item. That really can give you a really strong comparison. And a study from Johns Hopkins in 2017, that it was at a 0.91 relationship to diagnoses of hyperactive ADHD versus inattentive type ADHD. The hyperactive kids are committing errors, the inattentive kids are omitting errors. So that can really give us some really nice nuance on that. So here are some numbers de-identified of some testing cases I've done. So we've got 3 kids here. Now, VCI is verbal, VSI is visual spatial, FRI is fluid reasoning, working memory is WMI, processing speed, full scale IQ, and the GAI. So what you can see here is that 2 of these kids had gifted levels in the verbal, 1 kid profoundly. You know, they all had slightly different scores for visual spatial. Then we see our lowest kid here go 112, 115, boom, 155. So boom, crushed it on the fluid reasoning index. This is where their strengths are, right? So this is a kid who is gifted in that space, and we want to give them services in that space. And then we see all the kids start to have a slightly lower score for working memory, And then 2 kids in particular have lower scores for processing speed, including our blue person here, 155, 144, 137, 112, 89. I see this all the time. We actually call it the ski slope because it's just sort of sliding downhill. There's the FSIQ, the full scale IQ is measured across the board. And you can see here our orange person has a pretty standard thing, and things more or less hold together. So their IQ ends up being higher than our blue person because they were more consistent, where the blue person sort of started higher but ended lower. But then you look at the GAI on the far side here, and our blue person's on the top. So, you have to look at more than just the FSIQ. It really is the whole picture, right? So these are just some of the kinds of tests I see. Let's see. What professional development is required for staff who are performing these examinations to become a certified school psychologist in any state, but particularly New Jersey? Very high bar. They have to take a particular test called the Praxis. It's hard. I have many colleagues who have taken it, and some of which did not pass. I never took it. I'm not a school psychologist. I certainly work with schools, but I don't have that particular certification. And then we're all required to do continuing education, professional development, and you see a lot of workshops on how to test neurodivergent kids, because these are the kids who end up more or less being tested. So they're the kids we want to see. Let's see. Why is the whisk better than Raven's progressive matrices? I don't know if it is. Honestly, I use the whisk a lot more because more schools are familiar with it. It's a lower barrier to entry, whereas the Ravens, I have to usually explain what it is and why it's important. But if you're a family for whom English is not the first language, if you moved here from another country, if there's a disability involved that may impact speaking or hearing, the Ravens is a nonverbal test of IQ. So you don't have to answer any questions, you can point. So that cuts out a huge area of potential bias. So I've had kids who didn't test gifted on the whisk, but did on the Ravens because of its nonverbal component. So I always try to include a nonverbal IQ test when I'm doing an evaluation because I want to paint that whole picture. Let's see. And then Jacinta says, what should parents look for when choosing a school that does not offer a gifted and talented program that would best support a student who demonstrates high average to superior abilities? So really what you want to look for there, and that's a fabulous question, is schools who are willing to think outside the box. Because if a kid is performing at that level above where their age indicates there should be, then the simplest answer is to move them down the hall, right? If you have a 3rd grader who's doing 5th grade math, there is no reason that kid should be taking math with 3rd graders. Walk them down the hall to 5th grade. And schools will say, well, I don't know. But the good schools will say, well, let's talk about it. Let's have that conversation, especially if it's in the same building. Like, I understand if you got to bus them across town, it's a little harder, but we can figure it out, right? If you can keep them in district in the building, you're going to get better results because it's free acceleration. Why not move them? So yes, so here's our ski slope. Oftentimes we get our verbal, fluid reasoning, visual spatial, working memory, processing speed. And this gets into some of the neurology of how the gifted brain works, where there's a lot of information. And if things don't come very quickly, the gifted brain doesn't often have that second gear to downshift into to really grind through it. So you might see a lot of kids who say, huh, and then they think for a while and they end up getting the answer because they're very smart, but often past this arbitrary time limit. So that's the IQ testing piece of this. So let's see, I'm going to get through all the rest of our questions here. Do kids with ADHD test higher if they are on ADHD meds? Ooh, great question. So it is a good idea if your kid is on medication to send them to the testing on their medication, because we want to see the best version of this kid, and the medication is going to help us see the best version of that kid, right? In terms of sustaining attention, following directions, sitting in the chair, not missing things. So definitely we want to do that because that's also going to they're going to have a better score across the board, but they're going to make fewer errors of omission, and they're more likely to have a higher floor in working memory and processing speed. Are only school psychologists be allowed the ones to conduct the assessments? Not necessarily. I mean, not every psychologist likes to do testing. Not every psychologist can do testing. The vast majority of grad school programs train you in it. I know mine took it very seriously. It's why I do it as much as I do, and frankly, why I like it as much as I do. But most people will tell you, like, I don't really do testing, or I totally do testing. I would say probably my practice is 80% therapy, 20% testing, because I like it, but I just don't take that many testing cases. So any licensed mental health professional can conduct a test. However, you need to be a certified school psychologist or a psychologist to interpret the data. And this is where it gets a little muddy, because some schools will hire a psychometrician, someone who can just do the testing, is in the room, prompting the answers, writing them down. Then they give them to the doctor to actually score, because you need to have the express training in the school, in that testing process, to interpret the test. You will see some people who aren't doctors who are school psychologists, because there aren't enough school psychologists. So you'll see people with a it's a Psy-S, I believe is the degree, PSY.S, instead of a Psy-D, which is what I have. And that's, they have a special certification in school psychology. So they're able to do this test, because there just aren't enough people, right? So if you're, and in some of the districts, if you get out to Northwest Jersey, or, rural Pennsylvania, or some parts of Southern Delaware, you might have one school psychologist for an entire district, rather than like one or two per building like we have in some of our other districts. So, there is a high bar to clear to be able to do these tests. We have taken steps to making it more accessible, but it's still a pretty high bar to clear. So let's see. Shauna says all public schools in GT are required to have GT programs. Yes, very much so. We are, there's a lot of variation, not only from district to district, but frankly from school to school. You'll go to this middle school, it's got great gifted programs. You go to the other middle school on the other side of town, not so good. So Cecilia, the test is called the Praxis, Praxis. We would love to see gifted kids evaluated on the emotional quotient. I would love to see those data. There aren't great measures on that, unfortunately. So even though the ones that exist, I think, are really solid, they're just not as out there. Let's see. Yeah. It's horrific. And that's why a lot of us do the work we do, to keep that from happening. So that's a whole other talk we give. So let's see, one more question. So yes, what is the best age to do the assessment? I like to start at age 6. I think that's the best, once you hit that level of whisk, I would say start it there. You'll see a lot of kids get assessed at age 8, grade 2. That's when I was assessed as a kid, because there's a lot of redundancy built into the American education system. So second grade is kind of like first grade all over again. And that's when you see a lot of gifted kids start to emerge, because it's like, well, I know this. I don't need to do another 8 months of addition and subtraction. I already got it. Can we move on to the next thing, please? And that's when kids start to get bored. That's when they start to seek out other things or find things on their own, or just show up as gifted kids. And this, you get a lot of kids identified at grade 2, and then again at grade 5, and then a lot of times also in grade 8. So then achievement testing gives us the idea of how well school taught your kid. So Wexler has an achievement test. I prefer the word Cock-Johnson when we're doing achievement tests. I think he gives a better broad picture. You've got the Iowa test, often used, especially in the middle of the country. The Kaufman, the KTEA is very popular. A lot of people use it. The CAT, California Achievement Test, or the basic skills. So lots of them out there. We're going to focus on the Woodcock-Johnson just to sort of give you a different one. Broad reading is going to give us reading fluency, how quickly kids can read and answer questions. And this is always interesting to me because the questions will be sort of, is this question true? And the question might be, the sky is often purple. Now, most of us would say that the answer is false, but sometimes you get gifted kids who sit there and they just zero out on that question because they're like, well, what does sometimes mean? What is purple? How do I know these things are true? And like you'll watch it happen. It's really fascinating. Passage comprehension, you have to read a little paragraph, you answer the best word that fills in the space. Kids may need to budget more time, especially if they're slower or more methodical readers. Letter word identification, can you read these words? Really gets at speech and reading delays. You can tell the kids who are missing certain words or certain diphthongs or sounds. That's where I'm often going to refer to a speech language pathologist, or maybe even start a formal dyslexia evaluation. And then word attack also gets at the speech reading delays, but by saying nonsense words. I like to do this one because it's silly. You're saying words like splurgity bah, and the kids are like, that's not a word. And I'm like, I know, right? But do the best you can. Oftentimes you'll see kids get great scores on this because it's fun, it's engaging, it's silly. Broad math, calculation. This is basically a math worksheet. Do the math, watch, definitely it's important to watch for simple mistakes. Are we dropping signs? There's often also a math cliff we see a lot. This, because in the ELA world, right? If you know how to read and you know how to write, you can sort of punch above your weight class. You can do a little bit better than what grade you might be at because the skills involved in reading and writing transfer up much more easily. Math is very concrete. It's very stepwise. So you can be a brilliant math student, but if no one's taught you how to do fractions, you can't answer a fractions question. You just don't know it. So oftentimes when we're doing calculation, once again, just raw math skills, you'll see kids cruising along and then it gets to dividing fractions. They stare at you blankly. I don't know. They are cliff. Applied problems. These are word problems. Now the words can help or hurt. A lot of times gifted kids do better when they can sort of get some context and suss out what it might mean. So I always try and pay attention to what that is. And math fluency, just like we did reading fluency, math fluency, how quickly can you do 200? You have 3 minutes to do 200 math problems, do as many as you can. The prompt says, make sure you watch your signs. I can't tell you how often kids miss that. So I'll count how many errors they make. And 99 times out of 100, the errors are, they did 3 plus 2 instead of 3 minus 2. You rarely see kids do 3 plus 2 is 6. A lot of times you see kids do 3 plus 2 is 1 because they're just missing the signs. Then writing, spelling, we're looking for phonetic spelling versus proper spelling. One of the words they have to spell is sergeant. Sergeant is a mess in terms of words. So you get a lot of kids who do the phonetic spelling. Calendar, cocoa, other words like that. Also, you want to pay attention to handwriting on that one. Writing samples, this one is very leveled on how old kids are. So it's going to ask them to do increasingly sophisticated types of writing based on how old they are. So you have a kid who's very advanced in performance in writing, but is age locked to a lower thing. They're probably going to absolutely knock it out of the park because they're capable of higher levels of writing, right? They're capable of writing 2 or 3 paragraphs where the thing is, please write 1 sentence on what you'd like to do on a Saturday. And that one, they're not necessarily marked down for spelling, capitalization, punctuation mistakes, but we do pay attention to that. And then writing fluency, same thing, write as many sentences as you can in a short time. It's also the last subtest usually given. It's the last on the Woodcock-Johnson. When I do mine, I do IQ, then achievement. So it's usually the last of a long day. Something we want to pay attention to. And then that gives us 3 academic scores, academic skills. So, what is sort of your basic level of skills for the things we're trying to teach you? Academic fluency, how fast you can do the things, often a thing that gifted kids struggle with because of the way their brains work, and then academic applications. Now, this last one is probably the most important number to me, because if giftedness is anything, it's taking information and applying it, translating it to something else, right? So you'll see kids who are average skills, average fluency, but superior application because there's something about their brain that allows them to take what they know and push it and do something with it. That's often what, that's what that number tells us. And it's give you achievement scores based on age norms and grade norms. Now, this is really important because we're going to compare kids first and foremost to the other kids that are their age. So I'm comparing 9-year-olds to other 9-year-olds. However, I also want to see how this kid stacks up against other third graders, because that's going to be a really good argument for me to do a grade skip. So this kid is okay. This kid is 9 years old in the third grade. Their achievement level is 12 years old and 6.5 grade. So I can say to a school, this is a kid who is lapping the field. This is a kid who could really do a grade skip of 1 or 2 years because their academic achievement level is in middle school, not elementary school. It's a hard argument to make, but these are the data that actually help us make that argument. Say lots of questions popping in, so I'll pivot to that for a moment. Where can you get them to take the Woodcock-Johnson test? Once again, any school psychologist, any testing psychologist, a lot of neuropsychologists will do this as well. Educational consultants will have somebody who can do it. Yeah, I believe we are sharing this recording, so we've got that. Let's see. Yeah, really like the Woodcock-Johnson. Yeah, so if your kid is tested as gifted outside of school, but the school doesn't feel like they are, this is probably the question that comes across my desk the most often. It takes some nuance. It takes some argument. It takes really understanding what giftedness is as a neurodivergence, as a piece of special education. A lot of schools still don't see it that way. They're like, well, these are the future Harvard kids. These are the straight A's, 1600 on the SATs kids. We know more and more giftedness doesn't work that way. Certainly not for all of our kids. So what we have to do is explain that to them. Usually when you bring in somebody like me or another one of my colleagues, we can say, I know you think giftedness is X. It's actually Y. Based on what you know now, don't you see how this kid fits your gifted program? And I'd say 9 times out of 10, that works. It really depends on sort of how open they want to be. Yeah, I mean, so I see a lot of times that schools deny gifted programs for kids based on maturity, behavior, emotionality. I always say, you want this kid's a behavior problem, so they don't deserve to be in the gifted program, put them in the gifted program and they won't be a behavior problem anymore. Kids act out, they act ridiculous when they're tired, when they're bored, when they're underwhelmed. Give a kid a challenge, they lock in, right? Our kids want to be challenged. We've got to do that. And also it's a little bit melodramatic, but like a kid who's in a wheelchair, would you say, well, you can only use your wheelchair ramp on the days that you're behaving well? Like that, it doesn't make sense. It's a special need. And it's, you can't, it's not good practice to make a kid earn something that makes their brain work better. That's just bad practice. And we're working hard on that. So, yeah, Connie's the best. Yay, Connie. So if you go to enough gifted conferences, you're going to see this cartoon a lot. I think this is important for what we're talking about here in achievement, because some gifted kids do really well in school. Some kids, their brains fit it. They can go along to get along. They're all about that compliance piece. Yay, us, right? But for a fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam, climb that tree. Now, obviously, the monkey is at an inherent advantage here. Yay, monkey. The monkey's going to do great, right? The fish doesn't have a chance. The seal and the dog probably don't have a chance. The penguin, I don't even know why the penguin's there. But I'm going to point out the bird and the elephant. So the bird's lower left. No one ever sees the bird. So I think the gifted kid is the bird. because the gifted kid doesn't have to climb the tree. The gifted kid can just fly to the top of the tree. But then Mr. Administrator guy behind his desk is going to yell at that kid. You didn't climb the tree. You didn't follow the directions. Because I'm at the top of the tree. You told me to get up the tree. I went up the tree. Right. So this is where we get into the phraseology of this. Like when the words we use matter. And also some gifted kids are like the elephant. They're going to knock the freaking tree over. Like, oh, you want me to do this? Pow! And they barrel the tree down. And then they stand on top of the tree and they stare at you and they go, see, I did it. Right. I had a kid, not one of my clients, but a colleague was working with this kid out in the middle of the country, and they were making this kid do some basic coding stuff. This kid did not want to do basic coding. This kid wanted to build video games. And I said, well, you've got to finish Scratch before you do this. So the kid said, fine, you want me to finish Scratch? And wrote an algorithm that locked every administrator out of the network and set the Wi-Fi password to change on a 16-bit encryption. I don't even know what half these words mean, and so basically he was like, okay, have I proved to you I know Scratch? That's the elephant. I'm going to knock down your system because your system is stupid and I'm not going to follow your arbitrary rules. I was not that kid, but I work with a lot of kids who think that way. So we got to be careful about how we ask them to climb the tree. Nonverbal IQ tests. We've touched on this a little bit. The Nagliarity is great. The Beery VMI is still probably the gold standard. I, of course, use the Tony a lot. Sue Johnson's work, I find it really helpful. Bender Gestalt, it's old school, but I'm an old school guy. It correlates really well with the WISC. Here's an example of nonverbal intelligence. So you have to identify this pattern based on the information given to you. So I would just say, can you find the answer? But even if they don't speak English, it's intuitable. So if we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the bottom, feel free to put the answer in the chat. Once you figure it out. So this is just as a test of nonverbal intelligence, right? You don't need to be able to speak English. You don't even need to be able to feel comfortable saying words out loud. When you figure out the answer is, see, we've got some different answers here. I like this. So the answer to all my friends out there is number 2. That is correct. Yeah, we have some people think it's 6, but think about the order of the colors. So that is how, wait, no, I got it wrong. Sorry, it's 6. Oh my gosh, it's been a long day. Sorry. Yep, you're right. Whoa boy. Hey boy. I should probably get some sleep. Let's move right along. Other measures. So these are other things you're going to see in reports. The BASC is a broad behavior scale. Dyslexia co-occurs a lot with neurodivergence, especially ADHD, autism, and giftedness. So you're going to see the GORT, the Nelson-Denny, the CTOP. Those are very common dyslexia measures. I do a lot of work with the dyslexia community, so certainly we could talk more about that if that applies to your kid. ADHD, the Connors 3 is probably still the gold standard, but you'll see the Dawson-Guare, the Brief, the Vanderbilt. Autism, there's a whole talk actually that I debuted at New Jersey Gifted Conference. Oh my God, Connie, what was that? 5 years ago, 6 years ago now? All about the overlap between giftedness and autism. So what does this all mean in terms of getting services? Yep. So you can request through school. They have 6 days to respond. You want to do that in writing. It sounds a little paranoid, but I always make sure I put that on red so they can say that they can't say they didn't see it. Private practitioners, Hoagie's Gifted maintains a list, as does the Gifted Homeschoolers Forum. New Jersey Gifted has a list, SANG, NAGC. There's a lot of Facebook forums. You know, my name is in several of them. That is certainly not saying that you need to contact me. There's a lot of people I trust that would do as good a job as I would. And that says a lot because I hold myself to a very high standard. And then also other services to the state of New Jersey, which you can find here. So, and then all of this stuff turns into a report. It's going to be a little bit of background information. You're going to go through the scores and the tests that were used, the interpretation of those numbers, what they mean, diagnosis or diagnoses, as the case might be, recommendations, and then service types, including do they qualify for a 504 plan? Do they qualify for an IEP or a GIEP, depending on the state or the district? And then we're going to talk about feedback. Who do we give that feedback to? Do you want me to release this report to the school, right? Do we want to have a meeting where we gather the child study team, where we gather the special education department? You know, I've been to a million of these meetings, some virtual, some in person, and it's nice to have somebody on your side, right? Because otherwise it's a lot of suits on one side of the table and they're glaring at you, and you're trying to go through the report, where it's like the person who wrote the report is the best person to articulate those data and explain what they mean, explain what we do next. So when you're talking about feedback, having a battle plan is a good idea. Oh, and when we send all this stuff out, I'm going to send you guys a sample report that's been redacted, just so you get an idea of what one of these might look like. Additional testing resources, you're going to get these slides, you're going to get, all of these things. These are great links to follow on what federal policy is, what the tests are that are out there, how to set expectations. It's, we want you guys to be informed. And here's how you track me down if you have any additional questions. I'm always here to answer more questions. So let's see. Yes, I am in northern New Jersey. I'm in Morris County. So, all right. So Aiden, I think we're right at time, right? Said a lot of words.
I believe so. And first off, I on behalf of the NJAGC, we want to thank you so much for coming in tonight and sharing such invaluable information to everyone. So I'm going to do a little air clap for you on my end. It's funny that a couple of people were talking about advocates outside of NJAGC. That's actually something that I do full-time as an educational advocate or consultant. So it's funny that was discussed, but at least what I can say is that we definitely work with people like Dr. Matt. So just that little note on that end. I think that we're good to go. Is there anything else that we should discuss, Connie, or?
I always like to say we are here for you. If you are looking for information on Dr. Matt, I recommend that you take a picture right now with your phone or do a screenshot. All right, so this is a great opportunity right now to do a screenshot.
Yeah. And hopefully Dr. Matt at some point can do another webinar, because we understand that you guys are really found his webinar to be very important, as based on all the comments and the positive feedback. But what I can say on my end, and Connie, I'm sure you'll do this as well, I'm going to type in my email address. That's if anyone would like to contact myself on behalf of the organization or any questions. And Connie, do you think you can type that in if you haven't done so already?
I think, yeah, I can put it in again, but it's been in there a couple times. I will be more than happy to send
really?
it in again. Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
I'm throwing it in there, Aiden.
All right. Well, I typed my information in, and wow, a lot of people are really going crazy over you, Dr. Matt. I feel like I'm like watching like American Idol right now.
Oh, geez, you flatter me.
No, really, it's crazy. It's unbelievable. It's like, Kelly Clarkson, who? I think it should be Dr. Matt,
I love a reference. I mean, maybe I'll have a daytime talk show someday too.
Maybe.
Right?
That's right.
Let me just echo what my colleague said, is that this is a journey. Like, this is not easy. And, I often share that, I was identified gifted in second grade. A big reason that I was is that both of my parents were clinical psychologists. They were trained at UVA by Carolyn Callahan, one of the giants in the gifted field, right? So I was born into a tremendous amount of privilege, right? And I own that, right? I'm not trying to pretend I was born on third base and I hit a triple here, right? So like, don't think you have to know all this stuff. 1 hour webinar is not going to answer all your questions. Gather your team of super friends, go to an NJAGC meeting. Saying is going to be this summer. It's going to be in Villanova, right? That's, for many of us, that's an hour and a half drive, right? And you're going against shore traffic, so it shouldn't be too bad. right? I mean, it's, come to our conference in March, sorry, Connie. There's a lot of resources here on the East Coast. We are here to help. And it's not a advertisement for my own business or for Aiden's business or for Connie's business. It's an idea that if we can't help you, we'll find you somebody who can, right? Because this is a very big journey to go on your own. So we want to give you all the resources. I often say my job is to be sort of a clearinghouse. Like, here's what I can point you at. Go do those things and I'll take care of the mental health stuff that's left. So I think that goes a long way. So, I hope you feel empowered. I hope you feel supported and informed, because there's nothing more dangerous than an informed parent. Just like the other thing is that there's nothing more dangerous than an uninformed parent. We don't have to worry about that with this group. So you guys are absolutely fabulous. I will look forward to hearing from you all again and doing another. I'm always happy to do a webinar. I'm a Jersey boy at heart. I'm happy to be back. So have a wonderful evening, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll be in touch very soon.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us,
Matt.
Dr. Matt.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Matt. See you soon.
I'm not going to, and Dr. Matt, you're good to go. I'm not going to end it quite entirely, because I'm still seeing a lot of questions right here that I'm hoping that we can answer. This is just kind of some housekeeping matters. I'm seeing a lot of people are interested, Connie, actually, in our organization, as well as potentially partnering, as well as collaborating. And I know that that's something that is really enticing. How about you, Con? Doesn't that sound pretty good?
It is. And I'm so glad that you're interested in this. We have a parent group. Karen just jumped right in there. Thank you, Karen. We have a parent group that is meeting. I have listed my email. Please, if you do not see my email, go to njagc.org, and I will put that in here, njagc.org, and reach out to me. All right, just president@njagc.org or jacobryanc@njagc.org. We have a parent group. We have a family group. These are families who have a gifted and talented student, and we are there to help discuss issues that involve our children. And we're not done. I mean, this is something that we work all the time on. We are constantly working for our kids, and we want to help you. And so please reach out to us. Thank you, Karen. Reach out to us, and we would love to meet with you.
The other thing and thank you for those words, Connie, that was really beautiful. And we need to take this to the federal level. Absolutely. At some point, we really need to form multiple coalitions to really attack this and ensure that this is taken seriously, and that our children across all states, not just a few, not just, is really taken care of, and that gifted education gets really what it deserves and is protected at the federal level legally. What I do want to say is that a couple of people have been saying, how can we partner and everything like that. As Connie was just saying, reach out to us. Our emails are always open. But the other thing that's very important is that I'm seeing a couple of messages about advocacy. What I do want to say is that not everyone from NJAGC are advocates outside of it. Some people are teachers, some people are lawyers, business people, that sort of thing. What I can say is that if it's not with us, it has nothing to do with that. It's all about us getting you to feel a little bit better and for you to have as much information as possible. So yes, while we could potentially help in a particular situation, it's really all about giving you as much invaluable information as you can to make the best choice for your family and for your children. That's something that I really want to stress right away. Do you help parents who are based internationally as well? I live in India. Okay, so that's actually a good question. What I will say is that obviously India has different education modalities and how some of the schools are run, or kind of some of the policies, but we do believe that gifted education isn't just exclusive to the United States. I mean, haven't we met with Mai from Japan? We've had a lot of people internationally who have really come to our meetings as well. So what I would say to that is you're more than welcome to reach out more and maybe even become a member. I think you can still be a member if you're international, maybe, right? Or maybe not.
Absolutely. But
Yeah,
even,
yeah.
even still, can connect you with someone from your country who is either connected to, say, Confortute, which is Yukon, or someone from National who knows someone in your country. So if you want to reach out to me, please go ahead. Roya, just so you know, you got to send me an email. Don't put your link in here, your email address in here. You have to send me an email. If you send me the email, I will sign you up. And I am sorry for that, folks, but the reason why we do that is because we don't want anyone to come in and Zoom bomb us.
Oh,
right?
it's the worst thing in the world, please.
If you've ever been Zoom bombed, you will know, or your kids have ever come home and said, we were Zoom bombed today in school. We don't want that to happen. So anyone is welcome to join these meetings, but we do ask that you send me an email and then we will connect with you. And then from there, you will get the link to the meeting.
And listen, we have great senses of humor, but when it's as serious as a topic about your children, that's something, you know, we don't have time for that sort of thing. And it also gets lost in the sauce. We have so many people chatting. It's just easier if you send us an email. So again, I'll just type in my email. I think I've typed it in a couple of times, but just in case people are like, oh, you know, I'm not sure. And again, we also encourage you to visit our website as well. That's something that's very useful and has a lot of information. And we're going to be doing some more webinars as well. It seems like it's a real home run for these folks. So my son is studying in, my son is studying in New Jersey in a TUI and gifted school through cloud schooling, but we live in India. Okay, that's interesting. So yeah, that is something that is offered. If gifted education is either something that is not, there aren't any program availabilities within the region in which you live in, cloud schooling could be an option, and maybe having in-home activities accompanying that or something like that. That sounds good. Let's see, where did you put it, Aiden? I put it actually right in the chat, right in the chat that you just typed in. I put it in. I don't see Aiden's email show. Let me type my email again. You can reach out for any questions surrounding anything, as well as Connie. Yes, please, more presentations. I'll be reaching out as well. I'm a district employee in charge of doing a gifted and talented audit this summer. Do you help schools improve their program? Wow, that's actually a really good question. Oh my goodness.
We do. We have professional development that is offered to schools. If you want to go ahead and send me your email, I will send me a little note with your email. I will then send that off to our coordinator and chair for professional development.
That's something that we really love seeing, because that's something that we're really trying to zone in lately, right, Con? I mean, it's something that is good. We really try to be a full service place, for one-stop center for any of your gifted and talented or twice exceptional or anything else within that whole world needs. So where are you located? I don't know if you're
was that to us? Are you?
I don't know, but what I can say, Cecilia, is South Orange Maple. I was just at that school today. Are you kidding me? That is so funny. Oh my God. I was literally just there today. Wow, that is so funny. Yeah, I was just there for some privacy reasons and stuff. Oh, yeah, where's NJAGC located? So it's kind of go right ahead. I don't want to.
Okay, so NJAGC, we have a representative pretty much all the way in every county. I don't think we're represented in Hudson, but we're represented in almost every county in the state through either our trustees, our board members, or our members. We really aren't located anywhere, and that's because we are New Jersey. So
we have a PO box, though.
We have a PO box. That's about it. In Hudson County, Roya, reach out to me if you're from. Is it Hudson? No, Berenice, reach out to me, because we will connect you either with an organization that's there in your county or the one right next door.
And Roya says MAWA specifically needs gifted and talented training. So I'm not sure if you're a parent, a district employee, an administrator, what your position is within that, or just a concerned community member, but parent. Okay. So, that's something that you can also reach us about to see if maybe that's something as well. We can do some professional development with MAWA. It really just depends, I guess, on how receptive the district is. That's another thing. But the more parents and community members and activists come together and say, hey, this is a big deal. This can't be ignored. This can't be, yeah, we'll get to it next year, or, you know, we'll talk about it in 4 years. The more you guys speak out, the more you guys kind of direct this focus, the more pressure is going to be on the district. And once there's more pressure on the district, not in a, you know, crazy negative way, but the more you say, look, this is a big deal, we need you to take this seriously, the more they're going to say, all right, you know what, maybe this is out of our pay grade, let's get some extra help, or let's partner with people, let's collaborate.
You know, Aiden, we didn't bring up the law. And I want to talk about that because
That's such a good point.
Professional development is required in the law. So school districts are required to give professional development to those educators that are reaching and teaching to the gifted students in their district. So if you get an opportunity, Roya, you kind of touched on this in particular, go and look at our website, go into advocacy, take a look at that law. If you join NJAGC or you're a member of NJAGC, you can go and look at the webinar that we had 2 weeks ago, which dealt with what are the requirements of the law. You really want to get to know what the school district has to do. We are amazing here in New Jersey. People in all the other states are looking at us because of our law.
Not only just the law, but the amount of work we have put into this really just has consistently shown. I mean, we have really an innovative, and yeah, it still needs some work, but we just had a gifted and talented law pass throughout the state. We have consistently been at the forefront of equity within gifted education, as well as in education at all. We are here and we're not going anywhere, because this is something that is so intimately personal and so important for all of our children. Because when, let's say, one group it begins to achieve, when they've been constricted, everybody achieves, because it's an example of being able to thrive. That's what we want in New Jersey. That's really what we want. I think that I'll stay on for like a few more minutes if there's any last minute questions, or if anyone wants to talk about anything. But what I will say, Connie, is that I really appreciate the legal aspect. You know, that's something that is often ignored. And the problem with professional development is that how they'll get around it is they will have somebody from the district in-house, but maybe as like a consultant or whatever, but they're still paid for by the district. That's kind of in-house, that will do professional development. And yeah, professional development may be met, like that standard may be met, that legal standard, but they've been in the district for years and 20, 30, maybe even more years in their career. And they haven't sometimes always seen other research pathways. They haven't seen other groups. And so they've been doing this for 20 something years, what worked in 20 plus years ago, what worked 30 plus years ago, what worked 40 plus years ago, might not always translate to what works now in 2023. And oftentimes, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but there are times when districts will sometimes have particular agendas or particular things they want to be expressed within PD. And if they sometimes use their own people, sometimes the best thing in the world is just someone to say, hey, you know what, let's get an outside opinion. That's what I do on a daily basis, because I don't know everything. No one knows everything, you know?
Right.
Would you agree with that, Connie?
Well, I would to some extent. I mean,
Yeah.
There's a lot of members of NJAGC who have taken the chance and gone out and done their own professional development, or gone to the school and said, hey, I want professional development specifically in this area, and then gone out and done that. So sometimes if you had somebody like me, right, I would do that professional development in my district, but I had been gone and educated myself. But it's when you, like you said, Aiden, it's when the same person is giving the same information over and over and over again, and it's not based on best practices. It's not based on the new research. And the law specifically says, and I know a lot of people don't like to talk about this law, but I love the law. The law says it has to be based upon NAGC's white papers, and it has to be based upon best practices. So if you're using somebody in your district who has not educated themselves, not gone to, if you're a New Jersey teacher in a public school, you belong to NJEA, and you've not gone to the convention and taken any kind of professional development, well, then you're not following what the law says.
So a couple of things, and thank you for that, Connie, and I perfectly agree with that. Roya as Jersey honors TUI in IEP, but the school level doesn't recognize it because the code book they use is from 2016. I'm not entirely sure what that means.
No, that's not true. Jersey must recognize twice exceptionality in an IEP.
I thought they were talking
And-
about a kid in like honors and they had it in IEP.
No. And
Oh
Aiden,
my
you can
God.
absolutely speak to this because it is it's in the law that they have to recognize twice exceptional. And it must be, if you have a child who is twice exceptional, they will have an IEP, and that also those accommodations need to be brought into that IEP.
And it's one thing, while that is the law, it's possible that the school district may not be following that correctly. That's one thing, but Connie's absolutely correct with the law and what it exactly says. I'm not entirely sure about your situation and whether or not they recognize it or not and how that's worked out tangibly. But the law is it's not in the code book, and there is no update in the NJ code book. Well, are you talking about the administrative code, chapter 6 within special education students? Are you talking about twice exceptional and whether that's in the code book? Because that's a little bit handled differently. I've spoken to Bergen County Director of IEP. I'm not sure if there's a director of IEP. It might be director of special services or the executive superintendent. Yeah, you know what? I'm a little bit confused. So maybe
Roya, we need to take this off here. And why don't you go ahead and reach out to us?
Yeah.
And then we can help you with this. All
yeah,
right?
absolutely. Because I think it seems a little bit multifaceted with what you're saying. All right.
Aiden, we need to wrap this up because we
Yes.
have to have a short meeting afterwards. And
Yes.
I gotta tell you, my phone is blowing up. My kids are calling me, so there must be something going on because now the second one is just called. So, but we do have a small
Absolutely. Would
meeting
you like me to give
afterwards.
you a call right after, or how are
We're
we?
gonna stay on. You and I
Stay
are
on?
gonna stay on, and then there are 2 people that are joining us.
Okay, so at this point, folks, we want to thank you for joining tonight's webinar. We were very glad to stick around to answer any follow-up questions and to talk to you guys. I felt like a radio show for a minute, to tell you the truth, but we thank you, and please feel free to leave at this point because I'm sure you guys got to put your kids away to bed, or you guys want to curl up on the couch with a bottle of wine, something. So thank you guys. I hope you guys had a great time tonight, and please remember to check us out, www.njagc.org. Okay, so thank you very much. All right, I'm going to
Thank
stop
you,
the
everyone.
recording, or Connie, I think you need to stop the recording actually.